welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your 10,000 icons on a map host, Madelyn.
I'm your cool mountain in the distance host, Emma.
And welcome to the show. It's side quest week, as it is every other week on Talk This. And this week it's Emma's turn to pick our topic. So Emma, what are we going to be talking about?
Today, we're going to be talking about open worlds.
Stunning to me that this was not a show we had already done.
I feel like we've talked about this tangentially to a lot of other things, to the point where I did think we had done an episode on it when I first was thinking about it. But having looked through the archives, I couldn't find anything, so I think it's just come up a lot, and we've never done like a full episode focused on it. So anyway, go outside. There, you did it. You're in an open world. Go find adventure. Gamer?
You sound like that guy who's like, video games, just go outside and do it. Chop wood.
That is the appeal of open world games, though, isn't it? It's like you can go out and do it, but you don't have to go out and do it.
Like, that's definitely
nothing I love than chopping wood in my open world game, to be perfectly honest.
See, I can just like hear Dad listening right now being like, no, I don't enjoy chopping wood in open world games. Ready for that feedback. That is definitely some of the appeal. I don't know. Emma, what inspired this choice? Did anything inspire this choice? It's always a risky move asking you for the inspiration of topics.
I guess this time it's just the Horizon Zero Dawn. What's the subtitle?
Horizon Forbidden West.
Forbidden West. Okay, never mind. Horizon Forbidden West came out, and I myself don't have any interest in playing it, having bounced off the first game pretty early. But I like to read reviews when big games come out, right? So that I can be abreast of the current talking points. And you definitely see a lot in these reviews, like, well, it's, if you liked the first game, it's more of that. And in some ways that's a positive thing, and in some ways you see some reviewers talking about, like, how the open world idea has not evolved at all since, like, 2017 when Horizon Zero Dawn came out, as evidenced by the sequel. So I thought it was a prescient topic.
Talk this side quest on something relevant?
We always try to make it relevant somehow.
No, I know, you're right. We just occasionally have ones that are like, this was relevant when I thought of it 6 weeks ago, after my last side quest. Mm-hmm. But this one, spot on. Yeah, it is interesting to look at Horizon Zero Dawn and then Horizon Forbidden West as markers of nothing has changed. I do think there are inklings of change in smaller open worlds of what that kind of storytelling can be. But on the large scale, we've still got Grand Theft Auto meets Breath of the Wild everywhere.
See, no, that's actually the thing, though, is, like, Breath of the Wild came out the same year as, like, the same month as Horizon, the first Horizon. But to be honest, I don't think there was a lot of talk around the time about how, like, this is the future of open world games. But it's been 5 years now, and I honestly don't think Breath of the Wild has been influential in the way that people who liked it hoped it would be. Every game has a glider now.
Yes, every game has a glider. Every game has climb stamina.
Yes.
And everyone wants their long-running video game franchise to have a broad vista reveal in a trailer, in a Nintendo Direct.
Yeah.
I think those are the ways that it has impacted. It has impacted in everyone wants open world Sonic, everyone wants open world Pokemon, which we have now, everyone wants open world insert your franchise here, and somehow that was the takeaway and not the unique design elements of Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
It does make you wonder, we've jumped right into Breath of the Wild discourse here, but where else can you start with an open world podcast than talking about Breath of the Wild? I suppose if you were doing this in, like, any time before Breath of the Wild, it would be like, where else can you start but talking about Grand Theft Auto? And we'll do that too, I guess. But in 2022, where else can you start but talking about Breath of the Wild? And it does make you wonder, like, obviously Breath of the Wild was wildly successful. Haha. But, you know, some of that is baked into it being just like a Nintendo Switch launch game, right? And it does make me wonder if it would have been almost as critically successful, even if it had been released as, like, Link goes on an Ubisoft adventure. As opposed to, obviously they were pushing new ground in terms of what that storytelling can be, and it wouldn't maybe have stood the test of time as being so, like, it's so great. But I do wonder how much of the kind of, like, flag bearer of it is that it took The Legend of Zelda and made it open world.
That's also interesting, because a lot of the, like, open world histories I was reading pointed to older Zeldas as, like, examples of, like, early open world type stories.
I saw
in
that
too.
Too.
They don't really make you do things like urgently. Like, there's always some sort of, like, you can do these sort of objectives in the order you want. You can wander into a cave before you're actually ready for it. And all that sort of stuff. So it's interesting to see that and think, like, well, it didn't really. It took away a lot of loading screens. But the design of Breath of the Wild is not that revolutionarily different from previous Zelda entries.
So I guess that's true, and I saw that as well, that many Zelda games were getting listed in this way. And I guess what it made me think about is, so before I was reading that, I was thinking to myself, as I always do on these side quests where we talk about a genre or a mechanic or something like that, I always come in with the annoying question of, well, what does it mean to be open world? What does open world even mean? But that's something that I definitely don't feel like I have a firm, good answer on from reading about this and thinking about this in preparation for this week's episode. Because it does seem to me to be something where the target has perhaps shifted somewhat over time. It would be weird. Like, I just have a reaction to hearing the old Zelda games referred to as open world. Now, granted, my experience with the older Zelda games is mostly limited to, you know, Oracle of Ages, Oracle of Seasons on the GBA, maybe the Game Boy Color, actually. And then having played the Link's Awakening remake. But all of those, even though it sort of felt like, yeah, like there's no urgency to you going anywhere or doing anything, you're not really able to sequence break. Which to me, or not even sequence break, just do things in different orders. To me, the Zelda games, you might have some, like, slight variation in what order you do things, but you need to do Dungeon 1 to get the feather, and then you need the feather to get to Dungeon 2, where you get the bombs, then you need the bombs to get to Dungeon 3, where you get whatever the next power-up is, right? And so it's hard to look at those and say, like, you wouldn't call a game that was made like that in 2022 open world, unless it was huge, probably. So it's interesting to me to look at it, unlike a lot of video game genres where, you know, a first-person shooter has been a first-person shooter always, right, and always will be, and a roguelike, to a certain extent, is a roguelike and will always be a roguelike. But open world seems to be something where the standard for it has shifted over time of what it means to be open.
I mean, I was just going to say, I don't think you would call that an open world, even if it was really big. One of the things I was thinking about in things like this is, like, well, there's always been these, like, JRPGs that have, like, huge sprawling maps and stuff, but you don't call those open worlds, right? Because they're limited in their scope.
Right.
despite having huge sprawling maps, like each area is limited in its scope. And so you wouldn't really call it an open world. One of the things I read had like a very broad definition of open worlds. This is from Game Developer. That was just like from a design perspective, looking at 20 like open world games, and what you can take from them design wise. And I think because it's from that perspective, the definition is like way wider than you would think of when you're looking at it from like a consumer perspective or a marketing perspective, for instance. Like the popular understanding of open world doesn't necessarily fit within like how you might use open world design wise. But anyway, they defined it as they also called them exploration games. And they called it where generally the player is left to their own devices to explore a large world. You can seek new and interesting regions at whatever time the player deems fit. No force forces the player's motion into new areas. There's no auto-scroll, and there are no artificial level barriers. So, like, these ones have, like, all the Metroid games and, like, Castlevania in their open world definition, which, of course, are their own genre, popularly, right?
Castlevania, and you mean the Castleoid genre? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, the Castleoid genre. Thanks,
Okay,
Madelyn.
go on.
It's like, that's not what you would think of with open world, but theoretically it fits that definition. But I think the popular perception of open world is you have a very large space where you can run in, you know, any direction for a relatively long length of time and not come across, like, a loading screen. I think, like, and obviously that open world has stuff in it, but I think that's the only real, like, understanding from a player base of what an open world is that you can run in a direction for a long time. In all directions, to be clear. It's not a long corridor. Nothing gamers hate more than corridors. You can run in any direction for a long time without hitting, like, a wall or a loading screen. And that's what open world means to most people who are actually playing games.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting way to think about it. It's, you know, what I was thinking about was, okay, where is the actual line between games with open world elements, which is like almost all games now, right?
Yeah.
And open world games. And I think that idea of exploration, I mean, obviously that having some kind of like space you can run around in, for sure. But I think that feeling, like, it's almost about player feeling, maybe, to me, which is a very murky way to define the genre.
The appeal of open world is creating the illusion of a place where the player can go and do anything they want, you know? It's about it's about enhancing that sense of player autonomy, however real or imagined that sense is in the long run. But because players like to have autonomy now, they don't like it when they aren't allowed to express themselves in the game. I think that's why you see a lot more games having sort of open world-ish elements, because that's a way to, if you give them an open space that they can navigate in their unique way, then that's a way for them to express autonomy even in relatively linear games.
Right. But then it feels wrong, like, I was thinking of Kingdom Hearts 3, right? Or any of the Kingdom Heartses, but Kingdom Hearts 3 in particular felt like it took each of those Disney worlds and made them huge. And while I'm talking about this, I was talking about this with noted open world aficionado, like my boyfriend here before the show. Well, he did point out, he was like, okay, but like those worlds you do sort of have to progress through pretty linearly. And I guess that's true for many of them.
Kingdom Hearts 3's worlds are basically just really wide corridors, if you think about them.
You know, that is spot on, isn't it?
That's not like a bad thing. I personally don't really have a problem with corridors if that serves the game design. But no, I would not call Kingdom Hearts 3 open world by most measures.
Fair enough. But I just feel like there are games that can get swept into this that's like, no, you would never call them open world, even though they technically have that. And so there's something about the feeling of it or the exploration element of it that feels like it has to be central. because, you know, I was, like, also in talking about this, I was like, okay, like, to really be an open world, does it really have to be a Breath of the Wild, like, no, right? Obviously, Breath of the Wild cracked open even further what it means to be open, to just say, you can do this in literally any order you want. You can go to the boss, like, you know, once you do the tutorial, you can go to the boss right away if you want to, or you can never go to the boss. And that doesn't seem like it's a requirement. Otherwise, it's almost just Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
But on the same line, it does feel like, oh, you should have some autonomy. But then there are also games that have, like, very linear stories that are baked in around an open world that still sort of gets swept into the open world category. It's all very murky, is what I'm
because
saying.
If you have autonomy in choosing when you can do side quests and when you can do the main story, that's still the same thing.
I guess that's true.
I mean, the primary open world right now, and I think what we see, like, reviewers starting to get sick of, which I don't know if that's the prevailing public opinion, because I think that reviewers have to play, like, 4 or 5 of those a year.
Yeah.
And so might be more predispositioned to be getting sick of them by now. Right. Whereas the average player might just play 1 a year and not be sick of them because of that. But the prevailing model is like the Ubisoft model, which you saw in like Assassin's Creed and all their other series, where you have a big map and there are thousands of dots on them. And you can go to any of those dots in any of those orders, and the dots will never end, and they will be there forever. Because there's, like, collectibles and little, like, side missions and then actual side quests and then, like, little progress meter bars or fights or whatever. So it's basically their thing is, like, they just clutter a map with unending things to do and mark them all. And then the player can go and engage with all of those dots however they would like to.
And it's so interesting to me that butts up against the really common or trendy or whatever critique of these games right now, which is that they're overly bloated, they're really repetitive, the dots ruin it, the exploration element of it. And I'm sitting here in terror because, so if you are a longtime listener of Talk This, you will know that I was very skeptical and not a fan of open world games for the first several years of the show. And I've made a concerted effort over the past, like, 3-ish years to do a better job of figuring out how I like to play these kinds of games and how I can play these games effectively. And while I do resonate with the request that, like, you know, you don't do the same boring fetch quest in 50 different places. I will say that doesn't bother me as much as it seems to bother, like, reviewers or Twitter people. Like, I've played a lot of Skyrim now at this point, to the point where my quest dots I have thinned the herd, and I'm gonna have to, like, finally finish the main story, I think. And so that repetitiveness doesn't bother me that much, necessarily. But I respect the request for, like, okay, they want more density. They don't want it to just be, like, there's, like, big open nothingness in between those dots. I get that. But I don't want to lose my dots. Please don't take the dots away from me. Please. I'm really bad at the games that want me to remember where things are. Like, this is why I was not good at Breath of the Wild. This is why I'm going to have to restart Outer Wilds, because I've taken another huge break from it again. Like, please don't take my quality of life stuff away from me. Please. Please.
Yeah. I think, like, it's just less than dots. Like, you see an Ubisoft thing that they just are like, there must be something everywhere. Like, we must have stupid, pointless missions everywhere, or else the player will get bored. I mean, there's a limit to what you should mark on the map, I think. Like,
fair.
I need a map that marks, like, my main quest and, like, significant side quests. And then if I find stuff on the map while I'm doing those things, that feels cool to me, you know? But I feel like the issue with putting dots for everything is that it all starts to be meaningless noise.
So I think that's fair. I just think so much of the discourse around it has coalesced into the dots are bad, that someone is going to get the wrong idea here.
I do, I feel overwhelmed, and I was reading reviews back when Cyberpunk came out, and that's someone just, put down, their map, and I was like, God, that is too many dots.
Yeah.
Those dots don't mean anything anymore, there's just dots.
But it just comes up across the tension of these kinds of games. Well, a bunch of tensions, which is people want them to be really dense, right? In these same articles that complain about all the dots, they complain that the space between the dots is boring. And that there's no, that it's just dumb and you're just traversing from dot to dot on the map. And complain about fast travel ruining games too. And so it's on one hand, people want things to be really dense. However, the realities of game design are such that if you want the gigantic, sprawling open world, the only way it's going to feasibly be dense is if a lot of that density is repetitive side quests. And that's just not something that anyone has cracked the code of fixing while also treating their workers half a step above, lifeless automatons at least. And Cyberpunk is a great example of that, right? That that's what they promised, and that was really not what they were able to deliver. And even though they're just re-releasing it now for next gen stuff, and it seems like maybe they've fixed some of it to be closer to what they were promising, but you're always pushing up against these limits of players want something that's really dense and has lots of things to interact with. But the only way to do that, if you're also getting the giant worlds that have become such a hallmark of this, is if that density is a little bit fake. I also think there's just a real, the terror around players ever being bored is interesting to me. The game can't be peak exciting all the time.
I don't really mean it has to be peak exciting. It just
I'm not saying that about you. I'm just saying that about some of the things I've read is all about the fear of player boredom. It's I don't know, boredom feels like something that sometimes you want to weaponize to make things worthwhile or make other things stand out.
I mean, I think the only open world game that I've completed to some extent is Final Fantasy 15 still. At this point, in terms of actual open world, I've played things like Yakuza series or Nier that have very open-y maps, I guess, that are city sized. I would say
Nier is bigger than city sized. It's not as dense as a lot of open world, but I feel like the Nier Automata map is big.
It's not as big as Breath of the Wild or Final Fantasy 15 or Horizon
fair enough. It's not that big, but it's bigger. It's bigger than.
I would not call Nier Automata open world, I guess.
Fair enough.
Which is interesting because you can run a long way without hitting a loading screen, but something about it, maybe because each area is so discrete, it doesn't feel like an open world.
But see, this is what I mean. It's such a tough definition because for some people, it might be an open world.
But anyway, that game was often boring. Which, to be honest, I think a lot of players felt that and did not like it. So maybe there is some truth to the fact that you need to keep players excited all the time, whereas I am just some sort of weirdo who enjoys driving in the car, listening to music. Not even driving. Letting Ignis drive the car. While I just, listen to the radio and, check my phone. Just, for 10 minutes at a time, just, letting the game drive a car. But I think that's just not a popular form of designing.
But at the top of the episode, you were oh, the player wants to go outside and do that, but in a game. When you go outside and do that, I walk the same stretch of Brooklyn over and over and over in my life. And I know that's not, we don't literally want that. I know you weren't saying that totally literally, but it's just like I was also reading the coverage of the upcoming Elden Ring, right, from those demos. And there's a lot of really breathless coverage around this game, which is to be expected. There's a lot of breathless coverage around any kind of Souls game. But there's a lot of stuff that's like, it's going to change the game of open world. Open world's next step is this. And it really just seems like it's very dense. Maybe. Right?
Yeah. To me, from what I've seen of Elden Ring, which is not a lot, to be fair, it really just feels like Dark Souls, but they took the walls out.
Yeah.
I mean, Dark Souls already has a lot of, like, the design ideas of open world, right? You can go to different areas in whatever order you like. There are probably some orders that are easier than others, but you can go in whatever order you like. And fight bosses kind of in whatever order you like. Within a reasonable degree, and by sort of searching in weird places, you find, like, lore and information about the world, or weird little things happening. So it's already, like, I'm saying Breath of the Wild just copied the Souls games. I'm just kidding. Breath of the Wild is the Dark Souls of open world. But, like, it already did that. And it just, like, it seems like Elden Ring is just taking the walls out and giving you a horse who can double jump. Which, I think that is the biggest innovation, to be perfectly honest. If in the next 5 years, just like we saw, like, gliders come from Breath of the Wild, we'll be seeing double jumping horses come from Elden Ring. And I think that will be a step up for the whole video game industry.
I can't argue with that. But yeah, not to, like, whatever. I haven't ever played any Souls games. I'm not hating on it. I'm sure the game will be great. Or I hope for everyone that the game will be great. I'm just puzzled by the coverage that seems to universally state that this is going to revolutionize open world games, when, once again, it just seems like it is taking a very similar formula and maybe just doing it better. Like, that was also all the coverage around Ghost of Tsushima, right? Is that, like, there's nothing especially new here. It's just done quite well. And that seems to have been the frontier in which these stories are going. It's like, it's just Grand Theft Auto, or it's just Breath of the Wild, or it's some sort of mashup of those and other games of that genre, but done better. I mean, Breath of the Wild, I realize, is sort of separate. But it's got a glider, and it's Grand Theft Auto with a glider. And it's just been done a little bit better than it's been done before.
I would say Breath of the Wild is pretty fundamentally different from Grand Theft Auto.
I agree, of course. I hope that's not a controversial statement on many levels, not just the open world level.
Yes.
I don't mean to say that. I just mean to say, like, all of these kind of... Well, we haven't really talked about Grand Theft Auto, right? And this was not really something I realized as someone who was definitely too young to be playing Grand Theft Auto in 2001. Right? But
what do you mean? I loved Grand Theft Auto at 4 years old.
Right, Grand Theft Auto 3 is for 3-year-olds, right?
Yes, exactly. That's what the 3 is for.
So I didn't really realize sort of how revolutionary that was. And how sort of shockingly different and innovative that was at the time. The idea that you could just steal a car and drive around and do whatever you wanted in the city. That was, like, game-changing in 2001. I don't know, there's a lot of stuff that just feels like it should have been invented sooner. But of course, games are so young that is pretty soon to have been invented.
I mean, I'm just always struck. It always surprises me. And I know it shouldn't. I know it's just, like, my own gaming experience that has, like, my blinders on, but I'm always shocked by, like Grand Theft Auto 5 has sold so many copies.
Grand Theft Auto 5, according to at least one article I read, is the most profitable media, like, piece of media of all time.
Yeah. It's wild to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I do, but also I don't.
People like it.
People like it.
But because of that, I mean, there's a lot of coverage. Go read all sorts of the kind of like anniversary pieces around Grand Theft Auto 3. There are way more of them out there from the past year now because of the horrifying widening car remasters, definitive editions. That's the real open world, when at any time you can shake and widen your car. That's the pinnacle.
At any time you can clip through the floor, and there's a whole open world down there called the Void.
That's called Skyrim.
I think that's all open world games. There's at least one place where you can find the Void.
Yeah. Highly true. The Void is the real open world. That's the real next frontier of open world gaming, is they encourage you to clip through.
Yeah.
But, you know, Grand Theft Auto really changed the picture of what games could be, and in a way that I feel like sort of everyone thought Breath of the Wild would do for open world games, Grand Theft Auto 3 actually did.
Yeah.
Like, everybody really did see that game and think, like, there was a quote in one of the pieces I was reading from one of the developers who made Saints Row, and it really was like they had sort of a game they were working on, but they weren't quite sure where to go with it, and somebody played Grand Theft Auto 3, and they were like, let's do that. I don't care if it's a clone. We're going to do it on Xbox, and people are still going to buy it. And they did, and they did.
Yeah, I really think that, like, from what I've read about it, is, like, that's where the idea of what an open world is in player consciousness now is from. Is, like, this big space where you can kind of you can cause chaos how you want to, and you can move how you want to in any direction, and find nonsense you can get into, basically.
But also, it ruined game development forever.
Why?
Because now everyone has to be a 1,000-person studio, fully voice acted. Every NPC has a family that you can murder or marry into if you want to. Game.
Yeah, I don't think you can do the marrying part in Grand Theft Auto 3.
Fair enough. I was just trying to, like, throw out there, like, every, you know, like us. I was just, like, it's not a good pitch there, I'm just saying. It forced all of this game development into this kind of escalating scales war, I think. Escalating scale war, starting from there and, you know, continuing on into cyberpunk disaster and crunch disaster.
Of course, Cyberpunk's whole thing is, like, they're making Grand Theft Auto, but with, like, an RPG system on top of it, which I think was maybe the development problem. What if we took two huge game genres and put them together?
What if? So we haven't talked too much yet about open worlds and narrative.
I don't think the games industry has thought that much about open world narrative. So that seems fair.
We're thought leaders here, I guess.
Like, the Breath of the Wild was not a game for me just because I need some amount of structure, I guess. Or else I get choice paralysis, I suppose, or something like that. But one thing where I think that it's significant narrative-wise is it makes it so that Link's adventuring, like, works, even with the main story, right?
Right.
Like, there's this looming threat, you know, Ganon is, you know, over the castle, and he's growing, and eventually he'll be let out, but, like, he is contained for the time being, and Link has just woken up and needs to get stronger so that he can face him, because if he goes there and fails, like, that's worse for everybody, right?
Right.
So that makes, like, the fact that he can just, like, go around doing random side quests make a certain amount of sense narratively without, like, breaking the sense of urgency in the main story. But I feel like you find a lot of open world games, like Horizon Forbidden West, for instance. One thing I read was like her journey west is always framed like really sort of urgently. And yet you can go and get distracted by tons of stuff forever. And I think it's just that it's not like these stories aren't good. It's just like the story and the mode of telling it don't feel like they make sense together. Because like those stories are concepted of just like any other, like other stories, you know, other game narratives. They sort of work exactly like that. But then there's like all of these distractions around it that makes it so it doesn't logically make sense or even like at all make sense. You know, it's not like there has to be perfect logic, but there has to be some reason why someone can just stop their quest and do whatever they want for 10 hours, for instance.
Right. This doesn't bother me in a lot of games. I mean, we've talked on the show before about how when Yakuza starts playing the, like, it's serious music. Like, yeah, you do sometimes feel a little pressure to not go play around a pool when it's playing the, like, it's serious, you're running through the street music. But, like, that doesn't make any sense. That game doesn't make any sense. I've totally destroyed the pacing of those games by going and singing karaoke and doing 20 side quests before I return to my mob drama. And that doesn't bother me very much. So that's not to say this is, like, a huge problem, but it is perhaps more of a, in some cases, a missed opportunity that no one seems to be thinking about this. Yeah. That we've all just accepted that it's fine. Like, and it is fine, right? We've all just accepted that sometimes it's fine that the gameplay doesn't, in that sense, in that open world sense, is not really canon, and, like, we're not supposed to think of it as taking this much time. But there are just so few games that seem to have thought about it at all that it's a little bit disappointing that everyone has just been like, it's okay, like, pay no attention to this. And it does mean that when the open world thing really does fit what a game is doing, it's exciting, even when the game sort of doesn't live up to full potential, right? Like, Spider-Man games have been open world for a long time. And it's like, yeah, Spider-Man should be open world. That's absolutely right. You should probably think about how that interacts with some kind of, like, urgent villain attacks. But it would be cool to have a Spider-Man game. Oh boy, here we go. Here's the mashup that everybody didn't want. I would like a Spider-Man and Persona mashup.
What does that even mean?
Where you play as Peter Parker in high school. Oh. And so you, like, Spider-Man on your, like, days off and in the evenings, but you have to go to school during the day.
Wow, powerful idea.
I'm giving this away for free. I actually think that would be a great game. It can be Miles Morales, too. Sorry, I don't mean it has to be Peter Parker. It can be Peter and Miles. That's even better. High school buds. Mm-hmm. But, like, that makes sense, right? Of course, what you want to do as Spider-Man, whenever you're in any Spider-Man game, what you want to do is be swinging around all over the place. Makes sense to be open world. Yeah. Similarly, it's a bummer that Pokemon Arceus is good but not great. Because you only get one shot at that first impression. And if they had, I mean, whatever. I say they're, like, never going to do this, but I don't know. Arceus is a step in the right direction. But if they had just done this, I'm not even talking about graphics, and I haven't played it yet, but I've watched Click Like Boyfriend play some of it, and I've avoided as much of the discussion of it as I can, because there's just no way to talk about Pokemon games without it being the same conversation in circles over and over again. But it would have been exciting if they had made the world just a little bit more interactive than they managed to do, because then I think they would have had something that, like, was really a knockout of the park. However,
the issue with Pokemon, I don't know who has them on this yearly release schedule, but, like, it's like they have to release something new, like, every year. Which means, like, I'm impressed that they managed to do as much as they did with Arceus. Right. Considering, like, the development turnaround. Like, they released the DLC for Sword and Shield, like, significant DLC, like, last year. Right?
And Pokemon Snap.
And Pokemon Snap, yeah. And I don't think Game Freak worked on the remakes. But those also came out this year. Yeah. And it does feel like they're like, if they had just given them, like, another year for Arceus, maybe it would have been a little bit more of a polished product.
And again, this is not... the Pokemon games are never going to have good graphics, right? That's just... You're deluding yourself if you think that's going to happen, because it's clear that that's not something that is a priority here, which is fine. But
the expressions in Arceus are a lot more animated from what I've seen, though.
Oh, totally. I don't mean to say that there isn't fun stuff going on here that is visual. I just mean, like, if you're still out there complaining about the textures, like, you should probably play something else.
Yeah.
Like, because it's clear that is something that I'm sure that they could fix if they wanted to, and it's clear that no one has the desire to, and the games sell fine. But, like, with Pokemon, it makes total sense for it to be open world. Nothing you are doing in a Pokemon game, and perhaps this is to the detriment of the series overall, right? Like, maybe the series overall, especially the more linear entries, would benefit from a more interesting story than just you are going through the league and Team Rocket, or whatever we're calling them in this region, is there sometimes, right? That's another way those games could go. But if the way that they are going is more toward Wild Area, Arceus, that sort of thing, then yeah, this captures something that it feels like it was part of the story of Pokemon that you're doing the whole time, and just because they were tied to that JRPG random encounter thing for 20 years, you didn't do that. So it's like, yeah, makes total sense. Absolutely fits what you're doing. I just think that the people that are still trying to tell cinematic stories here need to think about doing that in a way, well, just, like, should feel like they've thought about doing that in a way that's different, maybe. Especially for these games that are not just games with open world elements, but really are open world. I think that's why I feel like I let Yakuza get away with it, because even though many things refer to that as a small open world, and it sort of is, I don't think of myself as, like, exploring Kamurocho exactly in the same way as I do, like, I'm exploring when I'm running around in Skyrim.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, for one thing, these are smaller. Even as the city map has gotten bigger, they're definitely smaller than what you would think of as an open world. You can get from one map to the other in a few minutes, basically. Mm-hmm. But it is interesting to think of, like, exploring and, like, in terms of, like, finding things. Like, so I played both Judgment games and Yakuza 7, and I would not call anything I did in Judgment exploration, mostly because using the drone sucks. Like, they have this, like, drone thing where you can, like, find things around and they'll give you new skills and stuff, and that sort of feels like exploration-y, right? Like, open worldy. But generally I would not, like, you just go from, you find side quests basically and you do side quests. Yakuza 7, maybe because it is RPG-y, you can find like party chats just randomly around the map by, like, walking by something, which will trigger conversation between your party members. Or if you try different restaurants and order different things, they'll sometimes trigger conversations based on the foods that you're eating. And so that made me, when I was playing that game, I was more excited to, like, run around the map, because I was like, oh, I haven't been to this restaurant yet. Maybe one of my party members will have something to say about the wine or something. So it felt like I was more encouraged, outside of just, like, getting, like, completion points or whatever, to, like, actually try all the different restaurants and just run around the map for a while. Which I guess is slightly more on the open world side of things.
Yeah, I guess what I'll say is, even though I was over here being like, the dots, don't take away my dots, I am willing to hand over some of my dots if the world is smaller.
Yeah.
Like, I'll admit, yeah, probably some of the magic of running around whatever city you're in your Yakuza game is a little diminished by the fact that in most of the games, the side quests are pretty clearly marked. Even though, like, they're not clearly marked in your protagonist's brain, right?
Yeah.
They're random encounters most of the time, but for you, the player, they're not random.
Maybe they are, you know. by like Yakuza 6, I think Kiryu just knows when some nonsense is about to sneak up on him, you know?
You know what? That is true. I can't take that away. It's like, yes. At a certain point, you should know when you walk to that ramen shop that the owner is going to have something for you to do or whatever. You're right. But that's fine then, though. Like, some of them can be marked because in, like, that kind of amusing way. That would be funny. I would appreciate that. But I guess what I'm saying is that for me, I can't engage in a gigantic open world unless I've got a clear map. Because my memory is not that good. And also, I'm sometimes playing several games at a time, and even if I go a week between playing the game and coming back, I will have forgotten where I'm going. This is why you all would laugh at me so much when I was playing Breath of the Wild, because whenever I saw something interesting, I would pivot to that because I was worried I would never find it again.
Yeah.
I was like, I have to go now or I'll never find it again. So, I would like more, so the trick is, with open world, if you're thinking about, so we've been talking the whole episode about how, like, they're all the same. Why isn't anybody doing anything different other than Breath of the Wild, which no one seems to have copied, right? And I am sympathetic to it because I can only think of things that work on a smaller scale. I can't think of how you do something different if it's going to be as big as these games are. Like, I read an article, like, I played The Pathless last year for the show in one small chunk and then finished it in another big chunk. And it's like, yeah, that's actually an interesting way to take the game, where it's not so much that the world is so exciting, and it's not even that you're, like, discovering things that are, like, incredibly super interesting, but the movement is so good, and there are a few games that fall into this category. The movement is so good that just the movement is the joy of playing. And I suppose on the other side of things is, like, Death Stranding, right, where the movement is the gameplay. Now, obviously, to compare The Pathless and Death Stranding is kind of wild because they are very opposite ends of the coin in terms of what the movement is. But, like, the movement can't be the game if it's gonna be huge, probably. That's just not like, The Pathless kind of almost overstayed its welcome at, like, 6 hours.
Yeah. You know, we haven't talked enough about Death Stranding. Death Stranding is its own unique open world.
It's true.
Fair. It's interesting because it is so big, but you're not really encouraged to explore, right? You need to take the most direct route to make sure that your packages get there.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. It's an interesting way to approach it, of making it feel like there's lots of area around you, right? But you have to get from destination to destination.
Yeah, it's bizarre, right? It's so opposite from what... It's almost a closed world.
Yeah.
But no one's going to copy that either, because all of the press around Death Stranding, regardless of how well it did and critically acclaimed it was I'm falling over. You know? I have 3-hour cutscene with baby and then I fall.
That is basically how Death Stranding is, yeah.
And so it's like, no one's gonna copy that because no one, like, being compared to Breath of the Wild, flattering. Being compared to Death Stranding, everyone thinks walking hard.
That's what's fun about Death Stranding, though. It's fun.
I know, but if you
over.
haven't, you know what I mean? Like, even if you haven't played Breath of the Wild, you understand that a comparison to Breath of the Wild is good. If you haven't played Death Stranding, like, if I heard a game compared to Death Stranding, I'd be like, oh, how's the walking, though? And be like, oh, it reminds me of the early pandemic. Maybe I don't want that association.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it does just seem like innovation in this genre requires the maps getting smaller, and I don't know if anyone is willing to be the person who makes the map smaller. It just seems like innovation in games in general requires the games being smaller, and I don't know if anyone's willing to do that.
I would like games to be smaller. I saw someone saying, like, a game should, like, $1 for every hour of content. At least. And I was like, I'll pay $1 for, like, a second of content. Give me
No, you
your
won't.
$60 hour-long game. Maybe that's a little bit too much, maybe.
That's incorrect. You're paying $60 a minute, Emma. Your bank account.
But yeah, I don't know. I would like games to be smaller. It's just being an adult. You know, you see all these teens online, and I'm like, I'm tired. I would like Netflix shows to cut like 10 minutes from all of their running time, and I would like games to be 30 hours or less, please.
Well, it's like, it's fine if they aren't. It's fine if some games aren't. It's just like, in this genre in particular, I finally figured out that this is a genre of game that I can enjoy. However, I've been playing Skyrim for over a year.
Yeah.
I am finally almost done with it. And yeah, there were some periods in there where I took some breaks. Still, I was just talking to Clickbait Boyfriend about this when we were walking this morning. I was like, I've been saying that I was going to start Judgment for like over a year. And I've just had to like finish a game to get there. But of course, because of the podcast, then I start another game and like a game gets in the way, right? Yeah. But I was like, okay, if I can finish Skyrim, I guess maybe then I'll play Pokemon, and then maybe I'll play Judge. Like, it's been this constant. So it's like, it's fine for games to be long, and it's fine for them to be this genre. It's just disappointing that everything in the open world genre, or so much of the open world genre, has to be 500 hours of story content.
Yeah.
Which wasn't true, but just the marketing was enough.
I mean, what I'd like to see in open world games is things that mark, like, significant points on the map. You know, like significant hubs or significant out-of-the-way side quests. And then, as you go to those places, lets you find other things along the way. And once you find them, they are then marked.
Well, that's more or less
what I would
Skyrim
like to
works.
see. Yeah.
Which I think works pretty well. And you can toggle on and off, you know, which things you want marked. I mean, not like areas you can fast travel to. And I enjoy traversing in Skyrim mostly because I enjoy forcing myself to jump up cliffs as much as possible. Like, how much of this cliff that I'm clearly not intended to climb can I climb? Can I get over this without having to find the path? So maybe don't copy that. Don't copy that. But, you know, copy the joy of that.
I also think it's, in terms of, like, narrative stuff, I was thinking a little bit about Nier Automata, and, like, there are certain points in the story where it's like, okay, you have to go do the thing now. Yeah. Right? Like, and if you don't go and do it, they're like, okay, game over.
Right.
Here's your funny ending.
Yeah.
Now go do it. Which is an interesting way to get around, like, having, like, moments of urgency, I guess.
It does feel like more games should be willing to do that, though. I don't know. Like, especially if it's not going to impact this or, like, lock off the side quests anyway. That's usually sort of my problem with the kind of, like, the urgency or not urgency of it, is that I worry that if I advance the story, I will lock myself off from things that I wanted to do. And so, like, it's fine. Like, if sometimes, like, this would work well for a Spider-Man game, right? Like, if sometimes, you know, whatever, the Green Goblin is causing mayhem at the bank and you, like, definitely have to go now or he'll get away with it. Great, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I'd love to see more games experiment with joke endings. Any other big broad thoughts on open world games? Where should they go, Emma? How should they evolve?
The interesting thing that I think is my main problem with open worlds, which I think is a weird one, is I find them kind of lonely, I guess. Like, I think like the main reason I did Final Fantasy 15 is because you're in an open world with, like, 3 NPCs with you all the time. And I feel like a lot of open world games, because they're all about, like, your autonomy or whatever, you are just, like, alone exploring the world as your character. And I don't know, I think it would be fun if more games made open world things with characters in it. I thought it was really fun when we were driving by, like, a random place and, like, prompt us, like, hey, can we stop and take a picture?
Yeah.
It's like, it's just, like, a nice thing that happens, that I feel like open world games are more about, like, you doing it and you doing this, when there might be something beneficial to just having, like, a random NPC with you while you explore the world to make it a little bit more lively.
And that's a great way to make the world seem more dense without it actually having to be more dense, if that makes sense. Right? Like, the alternative to that is you need to have something interesting every, like, 30 seconds on the map. As opposed to, it's fine if there's not some kind of huge story moment here, but, like, you get something for being there regardless. So you get a thing to do for being there regardless. And obviously, I'm sure people would whine eventually that they were sick of their buddy requesting that they go pick flowers for them, but, like, whatever. I don't know.
That was, like, the issue with Final Fantasy 15 that I think is just, like, the limitations of the time it came out. Is like, yes, they will remark that it's very hot, like, 800 times during the game.
That's what you do when you're hot. Have you ever been hot? Well, it's the only
That's
thing
all
you
you're
can
right.
talk about.
All you say is, like, man, it's hot. It's really hot outside.
That is, like, that's real. Record yourself. I do wonder if the real solution to the... I don't know. You tell me if this is actually possible or if I'm being stupid. But the solution to these games having to be bigger and bigger and filled with content, I do wonder if it's some kind of procedural generation thing.
I think that there are definitely interesting ways that you can use procedural generation, but I think that the way open worlds have been using them right now, because you see this in, like, Far Cry, I think Far Cry was using procedural generation. It's just like, there's just, like, random BS on the map. It's not using it procedurally to make, like, an interesting story happen. It's just like, here's some more random BS that you can shoot at. Because we have to make sure that you have lots of stuff to do. And generally, I think that a lot of stuff that happens machine-wise can be interesting, right? But it takes someone actually taking what the machine spits out and curating it, I guess, right, and controlling it for different variables to make it actually work. And I'm worried that in a lot of artistic fields, people just see, like, machine creation and just see, like, cheap labor. That without really care for quality necessarily. So while I think that there are uses for it and interesting ways you can take it, and there are definitely games that use procedural generation to interesting effects, you know, like survival sort of games, like Oregon Trail type games can use procedural generation in interesting ways. But you have to know how to use it and not just, like, stick it in there.
No, I was mostly thinking of, so obviously there's demand out there for these games to be huge, right? And so I was wondering okay, if that demand for the games to be huge is going to be there, there's only going to be demand for them to be huger and huger, and the human cost of that is just not, like, at a certain point becomes just absolutely impossible. So wondering whether, you know, the long-term solution for that is this kind of, like, human curated to some extent. Like, does it become less work to, like, outsource some of it to machines, not just in terms of it being cheaper, but, like, can you create that, like, I don't know, it doesn't solve the problem of, like, boring repetitive dots, but it maybe solves the problem of those boring repetitive dots, like, meaning that someone has to work until 2 a.m. Maybe
I don't know enough about this to speak. I don't know enough about it to speak authoritatively on that.
Fair enough. It also seems like maybe, I mean, I don't know, obviously it's worked really well for No Man's Sky, so for, like, certain types of exploration games.
after a lot of work, it has worked
Right.
really well for No Man's Sky.
Sorry, of
to
course.
be clear.
Yeah. I don't mean to say it worked right away, but eventually they figured out how to make it work well for No Man's Sky. So it seems like also for a certain type of exploration game. But again, I just think in the end, someone has got to step up and say these things have got to be smaller and they'll be better. And I don't care what the capital G gamers think. I don't get it. For games that like don't have tons of microtransactions, don't you want people buying more of them? Like, everyone's conditioned to buy the $60 game anyway, right? Like, they're gonna pay the $60. Don't you want them buying 3 of those instead of 1?
I don't know.
I know there are gamers out there who are on a budget who don't have the budget for 3 instead of 1, but I don't know. What percentage of the market is that?
I don't know.
I'm asking you a lot of questions that I expect you to know the answers to, Emma.
And that's our open world podcast.
Thanks for tuning into the show, folks. Do you have a favorite open world game that you've played? Do you have a way to define open world that's better than Emma's and Maya's? There's an open space. You can run around and you feel like an adventurer. Kind of definition that we landed on here. Do you have a preferred size of your open world? Should it be just a single room, or should it be the size of the entire Earth? What direction do you want to see the genre go in that we maybe didn't talk about? Or ways it could interact with other genres that we didn't talk about? Or ways Pokemon could appear at random in other open world games? Or any of that. If you have thoughts on anything on the show, hit us up on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games that are in the hat for our main editions, and read our blog, featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend with the not open world Kingdom Hearts games. Alas. Are any of them open world? Is 358/2 open world?
No.
Is Coded open world?
No.
Is Union Cross open world?
No.
And Split Screen, with Crash Landing on You, which is the ultimate open world North Korean adventure, and My Hero Academia. But most importantly, if you enjoy the show, you should subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, wherever you can find podcasts, you can find Talk This. Next week we are talking about 2 games, and Emma will tell you what they are.
Forza Horizon 5 is our new game, and King of Fighters is our old game.
I still haven't looked up whether Forza is on PS4, if it's PS4za, or if it's only PS5za.
You could probably swap those 2 series, and Forza could be our old game, and King of Fighters could be our new game also, but... Because I think the new King of Fighters just came out, and Forza is a pretty old series. But that's how it is. One is our old, one is our new.
Something's gotta be old, and something's gotta be new. So tune in for that next week. In 2 weeks, it's that time of the side quest season again. It'll be March, and it'll be time for our 6 weeks in gaming. So I am sure going to try to finish Skyrim, so we can stop having Madelyn's Skyrim update, where I'm like, I did some stuff. I plunged into the void. I think about
We will
that
continue to have Emma's Cold Steel update for many episodes to come, so don't you worry.
Don't worry, listeners. Cold Steel fans out there that tune in, don't worry. Well, folks, that's it for this week's show. Thanks for listening. Emma, do you have a sign-off?
This week, I hope that you go outside.
Chop some wood. Find some dots.